The night sky over Hadrian's Reach, a small human colony on the edges of known space, was clear and still, until a streak of fire tore through it. A metallic object crashed into the rocky plains just beyond the colony's perimeter, sending shockwaves that rattled buildings and set off alarms. Colonists rushed to their windows, staring at the distant plume of smoke rising against the night sky. Some feared it was a meteor strike, but others, especially the seasoned workers and engineers, recognized the controlled descent. It was an escape pod. The Discovery, Captain Elias Carter, a former military officer turned colony security chief, stood at the landing platform, his eyes locked on the distant impact site. His radio crackled with an urgent voice. "Captain, you seeing this?" "Yeah, I see it," Carter replied. He turned to his team, 5 of the colony's best medics, engineers, and soldiers. "Gear up. We're heading out." They boarded a rugged transport vehicle, speeding through the rocky terrain toward the crash site. As they approached, the glow of burning debris illuminated the landscape. The pod was mostly intact, though its outer shell was charred from atmospheric entry. "Check for survivors," Carter ordered. Engineer Ben Taylor pried open the emergency hatch, revealing the interior. A dimly lit chamber filled with smoke. Inside, slumped against the wall, was a figure. A woman. An unlikely passenger. She was alien, no doubt about it. Her skin had a faint silver hue, and her long dark hair was tangled around her face. Her attire, though torn and dirtied, was made of exquisite fabric embroidered with symbols. Even in this state, she radiated an air of importance. Medic Dr. Mara Vasquez knelt beside her, pressing fingers to the alien's neck. "She's alive, but barely. Breathing is weak, and her pulse is fading. We need to get her back. Now." Ben hesitated. "We sure about this? She's not human, Carter. What if she's dangerous?" Carter's jaw tightened. He knew the risks. Contact with alien royalty was complicated, and the Valtheri Empire, one of the dominant alien factions, was known for their disdain toward humans. But he wasn't about to leave someone to die. "Load her up," he said. "We'll figure out the rest later." A dangerous truth. Back at the colony, the medical bay was a flurry of activity. The woman lay on a sterile bed, her breathing shallow. Mara worked to stabilize her, analyzing her vitals with sonobiology scanners. Then came the real shock. "Captain," Mara called, her voice uneasy. "You're not gonna believe this." Carter stepped in. "What is it?" Mara turned the scanner toward him, showing identification markers embedded in the alien's biology. "This isn't just anyone. She's Valtheri royalty." The room went silent. Taylor whistled. "We just pulled a princess out of the dirt, didn't we?" Carter exhaled slowly. He knew what this meant. Valtheri nobility weren't just influential. They were untouchable. The Empire was ruthless, and meddling in their affairs was never wise. But something didn't add up. "Where's her distress signal?" Carter asked. Mara frowned. "That's the thing." It was sent, but there was no response. Silence again. No response. Taylor echoed. The Empire just ignored a distress call from their own princess. Carter looked at the unconscious alien woman. She had been left to die, and only humans had cared enough to save her. The medical bay of Hadrian's Reach was quieter than usual, except for the soft beeping of machines monitoring the alien princess's condition. Silena, as the scanner had identified her, lay motionless on the sterile bed, her breathing shallow, her skin pale and clammy. Despite the best efforts of Dr. Mara Vasquez, her condition was worsening. Captain Elias Carter stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. His mind raced with questions. Why was she abandoned? Why would the Valtheri Empire ignore a distress call from one of their own? Mara's voice pulled him back to reality. "We've stabilized her for now, but she's in bad shape, Carter. Her body is reacting to something, like a poison or a disease. If we don't find out what's causing it, she won't last long." Carter exhaled sharply. "We need answers. Fast." A race against time. In the colony's research lab, Mara worked with 2 medical technicians, running scans and analyzing blood samples from Silena. The results made her stomach tighten. She grabbed her radio. "Carter, we have a problem." Within minutes, Carter was at her side. Mara pointed at the holographic screen displaying alien molecular structures. "She's been poisoned. A slow-acting neurotoxin is spreading through her system. It's not natural. It was made to kill her over time." Carter frowned. "An assassination attempt?" Mara nodded. "It's possible. The toxin is sophisticated, something I've never seen before. But I think I can synthesize an antidote. The problem is, I don't have all the materials I need." "What do you need?" Carter asked. Mara tapped the screen. "A compound that neutralizes Valtheri neurotoxins. There's only one place to get it. The colony's deep storage. The problem is, we don't have much left." Carter didn't hesitate. "Then we get it." Not everyone agrees. The colony's governor, Richard Sloan, was not pleased. "Let me get this straight, Carter. You want to use our emergency medical supplies for an alien. A royal alien, from an empire that sees us as insects." Carter met his glare. "She's dying, Governor. And the Valtheri abandoned her. That doesn't sit right with me." Sloan scoffed. "I don't care about your sense of morality. The Valtheri could attack us for interfering. Do you want to start a war over one alien?" "She's not just any alien, Sloan. She's a princess. If she dies, and her people suddenly decide she was worth something, what do you think happens then? We're accused of killing her." Sloan hesitated. Carter pressed on. "Besides, since when do we let people die just because it's inconvenient?" The governor sighed. "Fine. But if this backfires, it's on you." A dangerous awakening. Back in the medical bay, Silena stirred for the first time. Her body trembled as she weakly opened her eyes, revealing deep violet irises that flickered in the dim light. Mara rushed to her side. "She's waking up." Carter leaned in. "Princess, can you hear me?" Silena's gaze was unfocused. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but sharp. "Why are you helping me?" Carter exchanged glances with Mara before answering. "Because you needed help." Silena blinked, struggling to process the words. She had been taught that humans were selfish, violent, and untrustworthy. Yet here they were, risking their resources for her. Her breathing grew erratic. "No, you should not. Waste time. I am already dead." Carter shook his head. "Not if we can help it." But before Silena could respond, the monitors beeped wildly. Her body tensed, and she slipped back into unconsciousness. Mara cursed under her breath. "The toxin is spreading faster. We need that antidote now." One last chance. In the colony's secure deep storage facility, Ben Taylor and 2 security officers worked quickly to retrieve the medical compound. Taylor wiped sweat from his brow. "We only have 2 vials left. That's barely enough for 1 dose." "Then we better hope it works," Carter said, grabbing the case and rushing back to the medical bay. Mara wasted no time. She carefully injected the antidote into Silena's IV, watching the monitors anxiously. Minutes passed. Then, Silena's breathing stabilized. Her heart rate evened out. Carter let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Did it work?" he asked. Mara hesitated before nodding. "For now. But she's not out of danger yet." As Carter looked down at the unconscious princess, he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The hum of medical equipment filled the quiet room as Silena lay motionless on the hospital bed, her breathing steadier but still weak. The antidote had slowed the poison, but it was not a complete cure. She needed more time to recover, but time was not something Captain Elias Carter was sure they had. Outside the medical bay, the colony of Hadrian's Reach remained on high alert. Word had spread quickly. A Valtheri princess was in their care. Some colonists were uneasy, fearing the Empire's response, while others were furious that her own people had abandoned her. Carter stood at the colony's command center, staring at the holographic display showing incoming ships. A small Valtheri fleet had entered the system, moving toward their location. "They're here," said Ben Taylor, standing beside Carter. "What do you think they want?" Carter's jaw tightened. "We'll find out soon enough." The Valtheri's indifference. Transmission request flashed on the screen. The Valtheri didn't bother with formalities. They simply demanded an open channel. Carter sighed and accepted the call. A holographic projection appeared in the air, revealing a tall, imposing alien with piercing golden eyes and sharp angular features. His expression was cold, unreadable. "I am High Commander Vekir of the Valtheri Empire," the alien said in a deep voice. "You are harboring a traitor. Release her to us immediately." Carter crossed his arms. "She's not a traitor. She was poisoned and left to die." Vekir didn't even blink. "That is no concern of yours, human. The Empire does not concern itself with the weak." Carter clenched his fists. "Weak? She's your princess." Vekir's lip curled slightly. "Not anymore." A heavy silence filled the command center. The weight of the words settled in. They had abandoned her on purpose. "You knew she was dying, didn't you?" Carter asked, his voice low. Vekir's expression didn't change. Her fate was decided. "We do not reclaim what has been discarded." Carter felt a deep anger rising inside him. "So that's it. You throw her away, and now you want us to do the same." Vekir's gaze hardened. "Do not mistake this for mercy, human. You are interfering in the affairs of the Valtheri Empire. If you do not surrender her, there will be consequences." The transmission ended abruptly. The room fell into silence. "They just left her to die," Taylor muttered. "And now they want to make sure we don't save her." Carter exhaled slowly. "No, they want her dead, and they don't want anyone to know why." A moment of clarity. Back in the medical bay, Silena stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for the first time since her arrival, she looked more aware. Dr. Mara Vasquez rushed to her side. "Princess, can you hear me?" Silena blinked, her violet eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. She tried to sit up but winced in pain. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're in a human colony. We saved you." Silena's gaze flickered to Carter, who had just entered the room. "Why?" she asked weakly. Carter sat on the edge of a chair, watching her closely. "Because you were dying." She looked confused. "That is foolish." Carter smirked slightly. "That's what people say about us." Silena exhaled slowly, her mind still foggy. "My people, did they?" Carter hesitated. Then he decided she deserved the truth. "They knew you were here. They called you a traitor. They said they don't reclaim what's been discarded." Silena's breath hitched. Even though she had suspected it, hearing it confirmed was different. "They truly abandoned me," she whispered. Carter leaned forward. "But we didn't." For the first time, something changed in Silena's eyes. A flicker of something she hadn't felt before. Trust. The human's decision. That night, Carter gathered his team in the colony's main hall. "The Valtheri don't want her back. They want her dead. If we let her go, they'll make sure she doesn't survive." Then Taylor scratched his head. "So what do we do? Hand her over, and we stay safe. Keep her, and we make enemies of the Empire." Mara spoke up. "We already made that choice the moment we saved her." Carter nodded. "Then we see this through." No one objected. The humans had no reason to care about a discarded alien princess. And yet they did. Because that's what made them different. Because that's what made them human. The colony of Hadrian's Reach had never felt so tense. The air was thick with unspoken worries, and every colonist seemed to move with a quiet urgency. The Valtheri Empire's fleet loomed in the skies beyond the colony's sensor range, waiting. Captain Elias Carter stood in the command center, arms crossed, staring at the holographic display. The enemy ships had not attacked yet, but they weren't leaving either. "They're watching," said Ben Taylor, standing beside him, waiting for us to make the wrong move. Carter exhaled slowly. They expect us to be scared, to give up the princess to save ourselves. Ben shook his head. Most people would. Carter's gaze hardened. We're not most people. A princess awakens. In the medical bay, Princess Silena sat up for the first time. Her body was still weak, but the worst had passed. Dr. Mara Vasquez finished checking her vitals, nodding approvingly. You're stronger than I thought, Mara said. Selena's violet eyes studied the doctor. My survival was not my doing. It was yours. Mara smirked. Humans don't like to give up on people. Silena glanced down at her hands. That is not the way of my people. Carter entered the room then, his expression unreadable. The Valtheri fleet is here, he said. They're waiting to see what we'll do with you. Silena met his gaze. Then you should let me go. You are risking too much. Carter crossed his arms. And if we do, you think they'll let you live? Silena hesitated. She knew the answer. If she left, the Empire would finish what they started. Mara spoke softly. They called you weak, didn't they? Silena looked away. They called me a disgrace, a failure unworthy of the throne. Carter leaned against the wall. Sounds like they don't know what strength is. Silena looked at him sharply. Strength is power. It is control. It is proving you are above others. Carter shook his head. That's not strength. Strength is standing for something even when you're outnumbered. It's not giving up when everything tells you to. Silena's fingers curled into a fist. She wanted to dismiss his words, but deep down, she knew he was right. A plan of defiance. Later, in the colony's strategy room, Carter and his team gathered. Silena sat at the table with them. For the first time, not as a dying patient, but as an ally. The Valtheri expect us to hand you over or stay silent, Carter said. But we have another option. Ben raised an eyebrow. Which is? Carter pointed to the holographic map of the system. We send a message to the Valtheri Senate. If they publicly acknowledge you're alive, the Empire can't just erase you without consequences. Silena's eyes widened. That is dangerous. So is doing nothing, Carter replied. They abandoned you because they thought you were powerless. What happens if you prove them wrong? She hesitated. I would be a problem for them. Exactly, Carter said. And that's how we keep you alive. Silena's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. You are willing to challenge an empire for me. Carter smirked. Like I said, we're not most people. A message to the stars. The colony's communications tower flickered to life. A powerful signal shot across space, aimed directly at Valtheri Senate channels, something no human colony had ever dared before. Silena stood before the camera, her royal bearing returning as she spoke. I am Silena of House Val. I am alive, and I will not be forgotten. The message was broadcast across the Empire. The Valtheri could no longer pretend she never existed. Carter stood beside her, arms crossed, watching the feed. Now we see how the Empire reacts, he muttered. And in the vastness of space, the waiting fleet began to move. The colony of Hadrian's Reach was no longer just a quiet human settlement. It had become the center of something far greater. Silena's message had spread across the Valtheri Empire, reaching nobles, warriors, and commoners alike. And now, the Empire had to respond. The Valtheri fleet in orbit, once content to wait, had begun to move. Inside the colony command center, Captain Elias Carter watched the holographic display with a tight jaw. The enemy ships had shifted formation, blocking any escape route. Then Taylor shook his head. They're not leaving, that's for sure. Carter exhaled. No, they're not. And I doubt they're here to talk. Silena stood beside him, her violet eyes locked on the screen. They have no choice now, she said. I have challenged their authority by surviving. If they let me live, it proves they were wrong to abandon me. Mara Vasquez crossed her arms. And if they kill you, then they prove their own weakness, Silena said. Carter glanced at her. She was no longer the dying woman they had found in the wreckage. She was a fighter now. Then let's make sure you live long enough to make them regret it. The first strike. The warning sirens echoed through the colony. A bright energy blast shot down from the sky, impacting the rocky plains outside the settlement. The ground trembled as the shockwave spread. The Valthuri were attacking. Defensive positions, Carter barked. Human engineers and soldiers rushed to their stations. The colony's defenses were not built for war, but they had modifications, automated turrets, energy shields, and reinforced barriers. They're testing us, Taylor muttered, watching the enemy ships reposition. They want to see if we'll just surrender, Carter said. They're going to be disappointed. The colony returned fire, sending plasma rounds toward the enemy dropships descending toward the surface. The battle had begun. Silena's choice. Inside the colony's armory, Silena donned light combat gear. It was human-made, not Valthuri, but she didn't care. Mara watched her carefully. "You sure about this?" she asked. Silena tightened the straps of her armor. "My people abandoned me because they thought I was weak. I will prove them wrong." Mara sighed. "I still think this is crazy." Silena looked at her. "Then why are you helping me?" Mara smirked. "Because I like crazy." The battle on the ground. The first Valthuri warriors landed just outside the colony's gates. Their silver armor gleamed under the harsh sunlight as they advanced in tight formation. They expected a quick victory. Instead, they found humans who refused to fall. Carter led the defense, moving like a soldier who had seen too many battles. His team outmaneuvered the enemy, using the terrain and human-built barricades to slow them down. Then Taylor fired from a rooftop, hitting enemy shields, forcing them to take cover. Silena, despite her injuries, moved through the battlefield like a ghost, fast, precise, and relentless. A Valthuri warrior lunged at her, expecting an easy kill. Instead, she dodged, grabbed his weapon, and took him down in seconds. "I am not weak," she whispered as she stepped over him. And for the first time, her people saw her as something else, a survivor. The duel that changed everything. As the battle raged, a transmission cut through the chaos. A deep, commanding voice echoed through every communicator. Enough. The fighting stopped. A towering figure stepped forward from the enemy ranks. High Commander Vekir. His golden eyes burned with fury as he pointed at Silena. "If you are truly Valthuri, then fight for your right to exist. Face me." Carter clenched his fists. "Don't listen to him. This is a trap." But Silena stepped forward. "If I run, I prove them right," she said softly. She turned to Carter, her expression unreadable. "You have given me strength, Captain. Now let me prove it." And before he could stop her, she accepted the challenge. The fight for honor. The battlefield fell silent as Silena and Vekir faced each other. The duel was ancient tradition, an honor battle. No weapons, only skill. Vekir struck first, moving like a predator, fast and brutal. Silena dodged, countered, and struck back. The fight was vicious. Every hit sent shockwaves through the air. Every dodge was a whisper between death and survival. But Silena was fighting for more than herself now. She was fighting for the humans who saved her. She was fighting to prove that strength was not cruelty, but resilience. And when the moment came, when Vekir lunged for the final blow, Silena turned his own strength against him. With one swift motion, she knocked him to the ground. A hush fell over the battlefield. Silena stood over him, breathing heavily, her violet eyes blazing. "I am Silena of House Val," she declared, "and I am not weak." The Valthuri warriors bowed their heads. The Empire could no longer deny her. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned a discarded princess into a queen of her own making. And for the first time, the Valthuri Empire recognized humanity not as a nuisance, but as equals. A heavy silence filled the battlefield. Dust swirled in the air, carrying the weight of a fight that had ended in a way no one expected. Silena stood tall, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to steady her breath. In front of her, High Commander Vekur lay on the ground, defeated. The Valthari warriors, once so certain of their leader's strength, now hesitated. Their golden eyes flickered between their fallen commander and the woman they had once called weak. Silena stepped back, her muscles aching, but her stance firm. "Do you see now?" she called out, her voice ringing through the silent battlefield. Strength is not about abandoning the weak. It is not about casting aside those who fall. Her gaze swept over the warriors before her. It is about standing, fighting, surviving. The turning point. The Valthari soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Some lowered their weapons. Others whispered among themselves. Even Carter, watching from a distance, could feel the shift. "She's got them questioning everything," Ben Taylor murmured beside him. Carter nodded. They came expecting a broken exile. They got a warrior instead. Vecchio groaned as he pushed himself up onto one knee. His golden eyes locked onto Silena's. "You fight like a human," he spat, as if the words tasted bitter. Silena tilted her head slightly. "Then perhaps humans are stronger than you thought." Vecchio let out a short, sharp breath. It was not quite a laugh, but it wasn't pure anger either. "You have proven yourself," he admitted, though his pride clearly stung. "But do not think this battle changes everything. The Empire does not bow so easily." Silena stepped closer. "I am not asking the Empire to bow." She glanced at the human soldiers, then back at her own people. "I am asking them to rise." The Empire's dilemma. Word of the duel had spread. The Valthari fleet above Hadrian's Reach had received the transmission. Other commanders, nobles, and military leaders had watched Silena's victory in real time. And now, they faced a difficult choice. To deny her claim would be an act of dishonor, the very thing their empire stood against. But to accept her as a true Valthari would mean acknowledging their failure in abandoning her. Minutes passed, heavy with uncertainty. Then, a voice crackled through the Valthari soldiers' comms. "Stand down," a new authoritative voice ordered. The challenge was fair. She has earned her right to live. A figure appeared on the holoscreen above the battlefield, a Valthari noble draped in ceremonial robes, his expression unreadable. "Princess Silena, you have defied expectations. You have made your claim. The Senate will hear your case." Silena narrowed her eyes. "And if I refuse to return?" The noble's lips curled slightly. "Then we will have to decide whether to see you as a problem or an opportunity." The message ended, but the meaning was clear. The Empire was not ready to accept her, but they couldn't dismiss her anymore. And that was a start. A moment of reflection. As the Valthari forces withdrew, the tension in the air began to ease. The colony, still standing after everything, felt like a battlefield that had won more than just survival. Carter walked over to where Silena stood, still watching the departing enemy ships. "You did it," he said. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "No," she said quietly. "We did it." Carter smirked. "Didn't think you'd admit that." Silena hesitated. "I was raised to believe humans were reckless, weak-minded creatures who acted without thought. But you fight for something greater than yourselves." She met his gaze. "Perhaps that is why you win battles even when you shouldn't." Carter chuckled. "You call it reckless. We call it determination." For the first time since she had arrived, Silena allowed herself to smile. The offer. Later that night, in the colony's command center, Silena stood before Carter Mara and the rest of the human team who had saved her. "I have a choice to make," she said. "Return to my people and fight for my place, or remain here." Mara raised an eyebrow. "And which one are you leaning toward?" Silena exhaled. "The Empire may see me as a problem, but I am not done proving them wrong." She looked at Carter. "But I will not forget what you have done for me." Carter nodded. "You don't need to. Just make sure they don't forget either." She smirked. "Oh, I won't." Silena turned toward the doorway. "When we meet again, Captain, perhaps it will not be as strangers." Carter watched her go, something in his gut telling him this was not the last time their paths would cross. And for the first time in history, a human colony had done what no one expected. They had changed the fate of a Valtheri princess. And maybe, just maybe, the fate of the galaxy itself. The stars above Hadrian's Reach shone brighter than ever, as if they, too, bore witness to the events that had just unfolded. The Valtheri fleet had withdrawn, but their presence still lingered in the minds of every colonist. Captain Elias Carter stood on the observation deck, arms crossed, watching the distant glow of the enemy ships as they drifted toward the edge of the system. They hadn't surrendered. They hadn't admitted defeat. But they had acknowledged Silena's survival. And in the world of politics and power, that was enough to change everything. Behind him, footsteps echoed. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Silena. She stood beside him, gazing out at the stars with an unreadable expression. "They will not forget this," she said softly. Carter smirked. "Neither will we." She exhaled slowly. "I never imagined I would owe my life to humans." "You don't owe us anything," Carter replied. "Just do something with the second chance you got." Silena glanced at him. "That is exactly what I plan to do." The final decision. Inside the colony's command center, the air was heavy with discussion. Mara Vasquez, Ben Taylor, and a handful of security officers sat around the central table, Silena standing at its head. "We need to talk about what happens next," Carter said, leaning forward. Silena nodded. "The Valtheri Senate will expect me to return and defend my position." Ben scoffed. "And if they decide they still don't want you?" Silena smirked. "Then they will have to fight me for it." Mara raised an eyebrow. "That's bold." Silena met her gaze. "Is that not the human way?" Carter chuckled. "She's got a point." But then Silena's expression grew serious. "I do not know what the future holds, but if my people do not wish to change, then I will have no place among them." Silence followed. Then Carter spoke. "There's always a place for you here." Silena looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she smiled. "A small, genuine thing. I will remember that." A warrior's farewell. The next morning, the colony gathered at the landing pad as a Valtheri transport ship arrived. Unlike before, this one was not hostile. It had been sent by the Senate, a silent acknowledgement of Silena's right to return. Silena stood before the humans who had saved her, dressed once more in the royal armor of her people, but it no longer felt like a cage. Mara crossed her arms. "Try not to get poisoned again, okay?" Silena smirked. "I will do my best." Ben stepped forward. "And if you ever get tired of royal politics, you know where to find us." Silena nodded. "You may regret saying that, Taylor." Finally, she turned to Carter, the man who had defied an empire for her. The man who had shown her what real strength was. "I hope this is not goodbye," she said. Carter smirked. "I have a feeling we'll run into each other again." She studied him for a moment. Then, in a rare gesture of trust, she placed her hand over her heart, the Valtheri sign of respect. Carter gave a small nod. And with that, Silena boarded the ship, the ramp closing behind her. As the vessel lifted into the sky, disappearing into the stars, Carter let out a slow breath. Ben crossed his arms. "Think we'll ever see her again?" Carter's smirk returned. "I'd bet on it." The beginning of something greater days passed, then weeks. The Valtheri Empire did not retaliate. Instead, whispers spread across the galaxy, rumors of a human colony that had stood against the Empire and lived. And more importantly, rumors of a princess who had refused to die. One night, Carter stood on the colony's rooftop, looking at the stars. His communicator buzzed. A message. He opened it. "Carter, you were right. Strength is more than power. It is standing for something. And I will stand. I will fight. If I win, we may change more than we ever imagined. If I lose, well, you know where to find me. Silena. Carter chuckled, shaking his head. Told you she'd be back. And as he gazed into the vast unknown, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.